and welcome to everyone on Facebook Live. Thank you so much for coming to another evening of Refracted Light Presents. So we put a poll up a couple of weeks ago and asked the over 3,600 members of Refracted Light what things they wanted to hear. And two of the things that got the top votes were Hermeticism and Qabalah. So Brother Jaime Lamb, who is always an amazing speaker, has volunteered his time to touch on two of those and talking about the Hermetic Qabalah. So again, thank you so much for coming. If you have questions, I'm going to mute everybody while Jamie's talking. Either put them in the chat box or just save them for the end. And those on Facebook Live, please put your questions in the chat box, and one of the admins will make sure that your question gets asked. So without further ado, and with no long introductions, I will introduce Brother Jaime Lamb.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for setting this up as usual. You're so organizational. And Francisco, I was going to say, thanks for that compliment, but know that it really is kind of your baby, Joe. When this thing happened with lockdown and everything, within a couple of days, you were Johnny on the spot with great ideas to keep Masons active in quarantine. And I think we all appreciate that, but you know, and everybody else stepping it up, and Jeremy with the new show, and everybody's been really trying to be active and spread the light, which is what we need in these times. Speaking of which, I have a presentation on Hermetic Qabalah, which is its own animal, kind of. You could say Hermeticism, you could say Qabalah, and there's certainly their Venn diagram sort of overlaps, right? And in that Wessica piscis, where they overlap, would be Hermetic Qabalah, which is a very particular kind of Qabalah. And you probably, here, let me get to my share screen real quick. You've probably seen that Qabalah is spelled many different ways. Let me get this going. Wait. Why is this? All right, here we go. Can one person tell me if this is good or give me a thumbs up? Okay, introduction to Hermetic Qabalah. Like I was saying, it's its own peculiar animal. Hermetic Qabalah. It's very syncretized, and you'll notice it's spelled with a Q generally, and that further differentiates it from Jewish Qabalah, which you normally see with a K and two B's, Christian Qabalah, which you generally see with a C, C-A-B-A-L-A or C-A-B-A-L-L-A, but what we're talking about is Hermetic Qabalah. And what I'm going to do in this presentation is just do a quick, just a cursory history, a quick overview to show how, you know, from whence Qabalah sort of came and how we get Hermetic Qabalah particularly, which is what this presentation's about. Then I'm going to go through just a little bit of theoretical nuts and bolts, not too much, because this isn't the sort of subject that you're going to learn in a PowerPoint presentation. You know, this is something where you either have to join a certain initiatory tradition, or you have to, you know, people ask how do you learn to practice Hermetic Qabalah? Well, you could read every book you could find on Qabalah, on Hermeticism, on Neoplatonism, on tarot, on magic, on astrology, on classical mythology, etc., etc., and you wait till it all clicks into some sort of system for you. So you could either do that and cherry pick for years, or you could join a tradition that has Hermetic Qabalah as its curriculum, which we'll talk about a little bit as well. And you know, that's really it. Or you could, you know, pal around with some people who know what they're doing in the tradition and eventually pick it up, you know. But again, not something you're likely to pick up in a PowerPoint presentation. So Hermetic Kabbalah, it's its own thing. Well, what I really wanted to do was focus on a practicum. That's what I set right in the middle of this presentation. So I'm going to pick somebody at random, somebody with an easy name probably, because I'll probably generate something by their name or maybe birth date. And if any of you follow my posts on Facebook, I'm using Hermetic Kabbalah all the time. Those sort of exegetical methods to, crunch data from a name, a date, or the planetary positions, or anybody else's astrological placements, or etc. And then I'm kind of plumbing the depths of that material for its occult substratum. Just trying to interpret the deeper meaning via methods like gematria, etc., which we'll all talk about. So a little bit of history first, not to bore you with this stuff, but just from kind of whence this came. So why isn't my clicker working? There we go. So the antecedents for Kabbalah are essentially a couple forms of Jewish mysticism, particularly Merkaba mysticism and the Hekalat literature. So Merkaba means chariot, Hekalat is chambers or palaces, and there's a certain body of work that has to do with ascending, sometimes through some sort of spherical model, or sometimes, via the chariot itself. And it was the antecedent Jewish mystical literature preceding the Kabbalah, and generally dealing with narratives such as those of Ezekiel and his the tetramorph, or the four living creatures, or Enoch, who was taken up into heaven alive. So these sorts of things were interpreted as to their esoteric value. Generally, you see in the sort of Hellenistic Alexandrian milieu in Hellenistic Egypt, you find that there was a commingling of Gnostic ideas, Hermetic ideas, Neoplatonic ideas, early Christian ideas, and there was a sizable Jewish diaspora there in Alexandria itself. In fact, I think 2 of the 5 or 6 districts were devoted to the Jewish diaspora. So it was a sizable population there. And I think that that's interesting because if we think about the first notable strictly Kabbalistic works coming up quite a bit later in the Middle Ages, really, we see their gestation period being in again the Alexandrian milieu of all these theological and philosophical kind of schools commingling, and a hotbed of ideas, just a petri dish of those sort of mystical, esoteric, and occult ideas, frankly. And we know that so much of the pre-Kabbalistic work was like oral Torah and oral tradition otherwise. And of course, as we said, the Merkaba or chariot mysticism, and the palaces, the Hekalat literature. So, and back to these, I just wanted to say that on the left there, Hermes Trismegistus, sort of the patron of the Hermetic arts, which are astrology, theurgy, and alchemy. In the center, that's Yaldabaoth, or a Gnostic demiurge who fits into their cosmogonical kind of pantheon. And then on the left, you'll see a Neoplatonic spherical model, which was picked up, of course, by the Ptolemies, and Ptolemy I, of course, who wrote the Tetrabiblios and the Almagest, just source Hellenistic astrological works, and he used these Neoplatonic ideas in his cosmology. So that's what was on deck in Alexandria at the time. So a little later, we see in order here from left to right, we see the Sefer Yetzirah, the Bahir, and the Zohar. And these are, the Yetzirah is maybe second through fourth century, sometime in there. There's conflicting viewpoints on when it might have begun. It's largely a cosmogonical text, meaning it deals with creation. There's a big, essentially the whole thing is the emanation of these 32 paths, you know, where you get 10 numbers, sort of proto-Sephiroth, 10 numbers and 22 paths. So prefiguring what would become the tree, or the recognizable tree of life, if you're familiar with that glyph. Those 32 paths are dealt with in the Sefer Yetzirah. I'm letting people in as I'm talking here.
I'll take care of that.
All right. So that's 3rd or 4th century. In the center, you have the Bahir, essentially a midrash. A midrash is a sort of a esoteric interpretation of scripture, and then the Zohar on the left. And these are all said to have their origin in the oral Torah, an oral tradition, and then they were finally written down. What I think is interesting, just as a sidebar, is you'll see on the Sefer Yetzirah and the Zohar here, there are the pillars, the bases, the columns, capitals. Not sure what kind of plants are going on here. The pediment, this arch with the keystone, just very sort of ideas that we encounter in masonry, classical architecture. And obviously these aren't these are just when they were printed sometime probably in the 18th century, but still that they would utilize these ideas regularly, I think is just interesting. God, this clicker. Sorry. 1 second. Okay, so moving on to Isaac Luria. He was in Syria, Safed, Syria, which would become Israel. And he had a particular system we know today as Lurianic Qabalah, which was, you know, he did a lot to codify that system. Again, I don't want to get into too much historical detail. On the right here, we have Moses de Leon, and he was in Spain. He is credited with being the first to sort of write out the Zohar, which is a pretty voluminous work. I mean, there are many volumes, but so he must have made a life's work out of that, probably from extant fragments and from oral tradition. But he really helped to solidify that at this time in Spain, in Castile, Cordoba. These were sort of where the Jewish diaspora found themselves in Spain at that time. This was probably one of the high points of Qabalah, but there was an exile of the Jews, I think in 1492 actually. The Jews were exiled from Spain by the Catholic Church, and they found themselves in Provence or the Languedoc, basically and this is interesting because they were basically in the vicinity where you would find the Albigenses and the Cathari. So these are Christian currents of essentially Johannine Gnosticism. Well, a lot of those dualistic ideas that we associate with Gnosticism and Johanninism, right? And that the Spanish Kabbalists may have had contact with them in the south of France, I think is interesting. You know, that there would be another meeting of these two ideas with which both may be said to have their sort of their origins in Hellenistic Alexandria meeting up again. So from Spain, we find that it so Kabbalistic ideas start to make their way north, and essentially they end up in in Florence, meeting with another current coming from the Byzantine Empire, which is falling at the time. And many texts are made available in the Byzantine, particularly Platonism, Neoplatonism, and Hermetica. So this guy, Leonardo de Pistoia, came into many documents. He brought them back to Florence, to the court de' Medici, Cosimo de' Medici, and he was selling him these documents, these texts. And he had the guy on the left there, Marsilio Ficino, he had him translating the Platonic documents, which were very important to them since they had a Neoplatonic academy in Florence that Ficino was sort of the head of, or the secretary, and or the facilitator, let's say. And he was translating these documents for the court de' Medici when de' Medici came into the Hermetic documents. So he was told to pause on the Platonic stuff, pick up the Hermetic documents, and get into that. Right after that, one of his underlings, Pico de Mirandola, was trained in Kabbalistic ideas, almost certainly from that current that made its way through Spain and into the south of France. So he sort of integrated a lot of these magical, astrological Hermetic ideas that Ficino was working on, and sort of melded them with Kabbalistic teaching, which he was immersed in at the time. So again, so this could be the first proper, you could call this the birth of Hermetic Kabbalah at this point in the Florentine Academy at this time. However, you could really go all the way back to Alexandria and the birth of Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, and Proto-Kabbalah in the Jewish diaspora in Alexandria. And you could call that Hermetic Kabbalah as well. We don't know enough to know that there was proper Kabbalah at that time, but there were certainly exegetical methods, which is essentially what Kabbalah is. You turn it towards scripture, you turn it towards the Torah, the Tanakh, the Septuagint, etc., and you use it to find the deeper meaning beneath the text. It's sort of an excavation job. That's one of the main applications of Kabbalistic ideas, is that you apply them to scripture, or as we'll find, you can apply them to just about anything. I mean, so we find that this current really solidifies, the Hermetic Kabbalistic current really solidifies in the Florentine Academy. From there, it moves north into Germany, and you find it in the work of Reuchlin, Agrippa, etc., Kircher, Rosenroth, and all the big names. If you're interested in that particular stream, we find in Northern Europe at the time, which itself mixes with German theosophical ideas and Arabic grimoire literature, like the Picatrix, which if you've read that, then and you sort of A/B that with Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, you find that, okay, you see clearly where Agrippa got a lot of his astral magical ideas from Arabic astrological magical literature. So let's talk about the tree real quick. The tree wasn't always this thing you see on the far right here. It had kind of evolved. You know, our Sephirothic arrangement that we're familiar with today, and our path attributions, etc., didn't really come to the form that most of us use today until Kircher. So this is Kircher's tree over here, but there were some antecedent trees where, yes, they're the same Sephiroth, but the paths are strange, and their configuration and arrangement are strange. There are different sort of analogous ideas. Like this one is some sort of date palm with its roots up in Kether. So there's really a lot of variation because it wasn't firmly marked out. You know, like if you read the Sefer Yetzirah, yeah, they're talking about 32 paths, and they're talking about 10 numbers, and they're talking about the 22 paths that connect them. So thus creating 32 paths of wisdom, but they don't give a roadmap. You know, there is no exact diagram of the tree. Okay, moving on from Northern Europe, you see this really important sort of codification of the arrangement of the tree in Kircher. And then into the Enlightenment era, so the Kabbalistic current, or really the Hermetic Kabbalistic current, sort of finds its way into Rosicrucianism. It's mentioned, I think, exactly twice in the Fama Fraternitatis. I'm pretty sure it's in there twice, but again, you know, there's kind of a mashup with alchemical ideas, German theosophy, and Rosicrucian ideas from the beginning of the 17th century, when the two manifestos and one allegory were published. So the Fama, the Confessio, and the Chemical Wedding. Also, early in the 18th century, Samuel Richter, early 1700s, Samuel Richter forms the Golden Rosenkreutzer, which is a Rosicrucian order from whence we get the Sephirothic grade distribution that you find in many Victorian era magical orders and later. So it's something that's still used. It's used in the Masonic SRIA or SRICF as well, which is Societas Rosicruciana. So into Freemasonry, we find that there are references to Qabalah in the degrees of the Scottish Rite, and as we mentioned, in the Societas Rosicruciana. And the grade structure from the Golden Rosenkreutzer is again sort of resurrected and used in SRIA, and Qabalah is mentioned. I don't think it's mentioned in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite, but it's certainly in the Southern. I did both of them, and I forget if we had it in the Northern, but I definitely remember it being mentioned. And of course, it's all over the place in Morals and Dogma. So just looking at these, though, I brought up these three tracing board images just to kind of show that even without the overt, hey, this is Kabbalistic sort of stuff, you could see these similar pillar arrangements and wisdom, strength, and beauty, for instance, WSB right here. Wisdom being Hokmah, strength maybe corresponding to Geburah, beauty being Tifereth, and those occupying three separate pillars on the Kircher idea of the tree, though not in this particular order. I put beauty in the center. But there are other ideas in terms of, you know, if you have Hokmah and Bina, and you have a central heart, which is Tifereth, you know, you can have the pastos, or this coffin representing materialism or the earth, otherwise known as Malkuth or Asiya, the Kabbalistic world of Asiya. You can go on and on with the, you know, the eye of providence being this light shown from Kether, or even beyond into the Ein Sof-Ar, Ein Sof-Ein, and many, the 3, 5, and 7, for example, also figures into the tree in terms of Gimel, Hey, and Zayin. I don't want to get into all that right now, but suffice it to say that there are definitely Kabbalistic ways to interpret these Masonic tracing boards. So, almost done with the history here. Let me look at the time. I didn't want to spend too much time on this part. Eliphas Levi, when he wrote his Dogma and Ritual of High Magic, he set it out in 22 chapters, and he attributed a letter of the Hebrew alphabet and a tarot card to each one. He wasn't the first to attribute the tarot trumps to the 22 letters. It was the Comte de Millet, or Millet. The Comte de Millet wrote an article in Antoine Court de Gebelin's Le Monde Primitif. And in the Le Monde Primitif, you'll find the first appearance of the attribution of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet to the tarot keys. But this was carried forward by Eliphas Levi, who in Hermetic Kabbalistic fashion sort of syncretized it with ceremonial magic ideas, with a ton of Hermeticism, some Neoplatonic ideas, and a bunch of other occulty stuff that was on deck at his time in Paris. So who went to visit him in, I think, 1860, I want to say, or thereabouts, was Kenneth R.H. Mackenzie. So Kenneth Mackenzie is presumed to be, though not, this isn't for sure, but many people think that him or his association with a guy named Hockley, and that he was into stenography, the stenographia, the Trithemian ciphers, in a book called the Stenographia. And that's this cipher right here. This is one of the, I forget how many folios that comprise the Golden Dawn cipher manuscripts. And this is where you really see Aleph Mem Shin and their elemental correspondences. You see Bet, Gimel, Dalet, etc., and their planetary correspondences. You see with Aries here starting down, you see He, Vav, Zayin, etc., going down through their zodiacal correspondences. So 3, 7, 12, 3, 7, and 12, that's 22. So there's the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and their correspondences. These are the ones I use. These are the most common ones that most people use. Yes, there are continental attributions that you'll see. If anybody's ever read Meditations on the Tarot, Journey Through Christian Hermeticism, I think it's called, there's sort of French correspondences that put the Fool in between judgment and the world. So they put the 0 card in between 20 and 21, whereas here it's in the Kenneth Mackenzie's, presumably Mackenzie's attributions, which who knows where he got them. The Fool is at the top, and then they go through. We'll get more into that in a minute. Well, that's sort of the theoretical section, is you have to be conversant with these sorts of things, That's why I said this isn't something, I'm not going to teach you Hermetic Qabalah here, because it would be impossible. It would be a multi-week course. I mean, years maybe. So what I'm going to go back real quick. So the way this finds itself into Freemasonry is through Kenneth Mackenzie. He was the author of a series of Masonic encyclopedia, and he was a member of the Societas Rosicruciana. I believe he and Wentworth Little sort of started it. Wentworth Little started it, but he made Mackenzie a frater of SRIA very early on, maybe even one of the first. And again, this document the cipher manuscript found its way into the hands of William Wynne Westcott, who translated it. He gave the material to Samuel Little McGregor Mathers, who turned it into a workable system, which became the outer order of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So these sort of theoretical grades where the curriculum is. And of course, that system spawned many other systems, such as Alpha et Omega, the Stella Matutina, Astrum Argentium, or whatever that is, Builders of the Adytum, et cetera, et cetera. So many post-Victorian era magical orders based on this particular system, which is the, for my money, the Bible of Hermetic Kabbalah. This is where it all kind of comes together into a really workable system with tarot, with astrology, with elemental, planetary, zodiacal correspondences. It's all worked up in this system in a very convenient and usable way. And that's the first time you really see that. So now here's the nuts and bolts. What is Kabbalah? We already said that it is an exegetical method, or it's a hermeneutical method, or an interpretive method, right? So you use it, you can apply it to anything, but originally it was applied to Jewish scripture. To find the deeper occult meaning of that scripture, principally through a few certain methods, which we'll get into in a second. But not only is it that, but it's also a cosmological or cosmogonical model. It is geocentric, because if you look at, let's go back to probably from whence the tree came, which is from this aforementioned Neoplatonic spherical model. So these would be concentric spheres, right? You have the Earth in the center, some elemental sublunary rings right here, and then you have the sphere of the moon, Luna. You have the sphere of Mercury, sphere of Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Jovis, Saturn, and then you have what would be Hokmah, or the sphere of the fixed stars, and the zodiac, and then all the way out to the Imperium, right? The primum mobile. And if you were to take this and sort of concatenate it, or make it into a line, or kind of string it together, instead of these Neoplatonic interlocking spheres nested within one another, if you were to, and they're in their Chaldean order, in case you didn't notice, these are the order of, what's a good way to put this, how the speed of their transit across the ecliptic. So obviously the moon makes the fastest transit across the ecliptic, then Mercury, then et cetera, out to Saturn, the last of the planets visible to the naked eye. So this is what's called as the Chaldean order, or the Ptolemaic order, and it is the most popular of the ancient planetary orders of the 7 visible planets. And planet, by the way, you count the moon and the sun because Astris planetes means wanderer, right? Wandering stars. So these wanderers move against the sphere of the fixed stars. They don't move the same way that say the constellations move, or the way Sirius moves, or the way Orion moves. They move much more rapidly. Sometimes they go retrograde, etc. They wander. So, and the moon and the sun, just like these other 5 visible planets, wandered. Hence, they were all planets, you know, not 2 luminaries and 5 planets. A minor digression there. So anyway, let's look at that Chaldean order and how it found its way onto Kircher's tree. You see the Earth, there's the glyph for the Earth right there, in Malkuth. The next most rapid transiting planet across the ecliptic is the moon. After that, Mercury, Hod. After that, Venus, Netzach. The sun, Tiferet. Mars, Geburah. Jupiter, Hesed. Saturn, Bina, Hokmah. Now they put the modern planets here, but imagine that this is the sphere of the fixed stars anciently, right? So now it's inhabited by Neptune by some, and Pluto is to Kether by some, but you would call this the sphere of the fixed stars. This is where the zodiac, the lion, the ox, the eagle, and the man, or otherwise known as the cherubim, or the tetramorph, for the 4 living creatures, inhabit this sphere, and then on to Kether. So just to show you that this is not only an interpretive and exegetical method, this Kabbalistic tree, but it is, or, you know, or some sort of computer, but it is also a a pretty decent cosmological model. And it's similar. In fact, it's so striking in that certain physicists in the modern era have also used ideas that they gleaned from Kabbalistic cosmogony. Now, this is from an occultist named Paul Foster Case. He was an Alpha et Omega member, but he founded the Builders of the Atom in the United States. And he took this sort of Yetziric model. I say Yetziric because this idea comes from the Sefer Yetzirah, where they describe an abyss above, an abyss below, an abyss to left and right, side to side. So you essentially have the Cartesian coordinates, right? These 6 abysses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These 6 abysses are expressed exactly like the X, Y, and Z axes of 3-dimensional Cartesian coordinates. It's exactly what that is. Now, whether Rene Descartes read Sefer Yetzirah, I don't think he told anybody, or at least it's not written down anywhere. But there's certainly this spatial model and its attribution to certain the double letters of the Hebrew alphabet. It's a very interesting model, and you could see it in Minkowski space. Niels Bohr, I think, dug deep into Kabbalistic cosmogonical ideas, so it definitely made the rounds about 100 and whatever years ago when people were devising the new physics. So let's talk about those 3 methods that we get from Qabalah, these 3 exegetical methods. So there's Gematria, there is Notericon, and Temura. So briefly what these are, it is, they didn't have the Arabic numeral in the Hebrew alphabet. They did not in the Phoenician or the Aramaic or the Greek. So what they used was a system called Gematria, where each of the letters not only had their phonetic value, but they also had a numerical value. And that's these right here, numeration. You could find charts like this really easy. But so you would take a word, you would calculate its gematric value, right? And then you would look for other words that had the same gematria value as that word, and they were believed by Kabbalists applying gematria to have a Kabbalistic resonance. They were believed to be occultly related to one another, as such to inform each other in some esoteric way. So that's how, in brief, that's how gematria works. So Notericon would be like a popular one is Agala, right? It's essentially a what you would call an acronym. It's essentially an acronym. Ata Gabor Leolam Amen, or I think that's what Agla is. Ata Gabor Leolam Amen. And there are several of these. Oh, another Notericon essentially is you ever see inside of the little fish on car bumpers, sometimes it says iota, chi, theta, whatever y is, and then sigma. It says ichthys in Greek, ichthys. It's the word for fish, but it's also an acrostic, which is the same thing as applying notericon, except in, and it means Jesus Christ, Son of God. Jesus Christ, Son of God, in a notericon or an acrostic. And then the last method is Temura. So Temura is essentially a substitution cipher, just like you would, I don't know if I'm sure you Freemasons are familiar with the Pigpen cipher. The Pigpen cipher is the one that has 2 saltire crosses and 2 crosshatch sort of tic-tac-toe configurations there, and the position that you use means that letter, and that would be a substitution. The most popular one I think the most popular one in Kabbalistic Timura is the Ait Bakar, if I'm pronouncing that accurately. The Ait Bakar is the Qabalah of 9 chambers. So I didn't put up a diagram of that, but you can get into that if you want. So what makes Hermetic Qabalah is that it's syncretized. It differentiates it from standard Jewish Kabbalah or even Christian Kabbalah in that you can find, along with these source sort of if you could say orthodox Kabbalistic ideas, you find mythological archetypal ideas. You find ideas having to do with magic, ancient and modern. You find ideas having to do, of course, with Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, and all sorts of different systems have been mashed up with the Kabbalah. And it's pretty much, without getting too chaosy, let's say, it's it's common to find Hermetic Kabbalah encompassing many ideas that were once considered to be outside of the purview of Kabbalah proper. Because as we said, Kabbalah is for the exegesis of Judaic literature, wisdom literature, right? So that was its main application. But Hermetic Kabbalah has liberated it to where you could literally, I apply it to license plates in traffic. I mean, I'm not trying to get the meaning of life out of a license plate. I'm not saying that. But I mean, if I'm sitting there in traffic, it's pretty interesting for me to just like crunch the Kabbalistic data, figure out where this person's license plate belongs on the tree, or figure out what this might mean. And we're going to get into that in a second because we're about to do a practicum. Just real quick, let me see. It's 6:46. We got about 15 minutes, and I think that's about what I got left here. So, as you could see, you know, there are many different correspondences and many different avenues and modalities of application that we can do with this Hermetic Kabbalistic system. Oh, and the tarot cards, each, you know, there are 22 paths, there are 22 major trumps, and they inhabit each one of these. They connect the Sephiroth, which have certain mythological archetypal kind of concentrations within them, and it's a really beautiful system. I encourage you to look into it. It's so much to break off in a little PowerPoint here, but I love talking about it. I post about it every day. My daily post is Hermetic Kabbalah, like to the max. That's it. That's kind of all I kind of mess with. And so a practicum. Now I'm going to open this up and I'm going to stop sharing for a second because, and I'm going to open this to gallery view and I'm going to turn on my magic crystal ball here and I'm going to be looking at some names and I'm going to pick somebody who has an easy name for me to use. I'm going with Tim Dahlman. Tim Dahlman, come on down. You're the next contestant on Hermetic Kabbalah. So Tim, all right, Tim could be the one to unmute himself. And what I'm going to do here, can you see me?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to take my tarot cards that I got right here. I got to be able to see me as well, so I know.
No whammies, no whammies, no whammies.
I'm going to take my tarot cards right here. I don't draw at random. I think you probably know that. But you have a simple first name, Tim. So I'm going to use Tao. I'm not going to use Teth. I'm going to use Tao. I'm going to use Yod, and I'm going to use Mem. That's a T sound, a Yod, which is like an I or a J, and Mem, which is the M sound in the Hebrew alphabet. So I'm looking for, and this is just stuff you got to memorize. So I know I'm looking for the World, the Hermit, and the Hangman. So I got 78 cards here. There's the World. There's the Hangman. Now I need the Hermit. 1 second. There he is. Very good. Okay, so now remember what we said about Kabbalistic exegesis, right? In the manner of Hermetic Kabbalah, we said that it could be applied to stuff that's not Judaic scripture, right? Like your first name. And we could, oh, somebody said what deck? It's the, I use only, ladies and gentlemen, only the CBD Marseille. It's the Tarot de Marseille, Yoav Ben Dov. Yoav Ben Dov deck. They're really good quality card stock. You hear that? Anyway, so what we picked for you is the world, right? This is the letter Teth. It represents Saturn. So I would generally, if I'm crunching your name through the Kabbalistic exegetical or hermeneutical machine, I would say we got Teth. So I'm drawing the Hebrew letter Teth, and I'm looking at this card and I'm saying, okay, I'm drawing the glyph for Saturn. I happen to know that it has a gematria value of 400. That letter does. I know that we can make it correspond to the 32nd path. That's the path it inhabits. You could also say it's the Sephira Bina because it's Saturn, right? So I'll do 3 in a circle, so I remember that. It's the 3rd Sephira. So I come up with some little data points just based on that. You know, it's the world. Remember we talked about the lion, the ox, the eagle, and the man? Well, this is the letter T in your name. So to me, this, because I've spent many years just kind of memorizing this stuff and working with these sorts of things, when I see this card, I see all those correspondences. They flash up. I don't have to think about them or consult a book. And that's kind of where you want to get to when you're doing this sort of stuff. So if I'm looking for deeper meaning in the name Tim, I start with the letter T. I start with Teth, right? Or not Teth. I start with Tav, 400. Next, we go to Yod, Tim, T-I. So Yod, it's an I, it's a J. It's part of the Tetragrammaton. And it is represented in the major arcana by the Hermit, right? Kind of looks like Tim. Who just said that? Yosef Martinez just said that. It does kind of look like you. And it's right in the center of your name. So it's strange that we're looking for stuff that corresponds to Tim, somehow occultly elucidates the very nature of Tim, you know? And it's weird that we found the Hermit there. I don't know, man. I think we're onto something with you. But this also corresponds to where are you going? This is not the time to leave here, Tim. So this corresponds to you. This is Virgo, right? It's an earth sign. Its gematria value is 10. So let's think about that for a second. Let's draw a letter Yod. Let's do the glyph for Virgo, the zodiacal glyph for Virgo. Let's put down the letter 10 because that's what it corresponds to. I forget which path it is, but it's only because I'm on the spot right now. Okay, so M. This is Mem. Oh, we could do what these mean too. So that Tau means cross. That's what it means in English. That Yod means hand. So I'm going to write the word hand here. I'm just writing down all my data, you know, from these cards. Le Pendu, that means the hanged man. And he's upside down. You could see those two scaffolds on either side have 6 knots each, which always makes me think of the solstice, right? And or you know, that he's on either side of the year. Maybe he's at the equinoxes, or maybe he's at the solstice. Maybe he's at the winter solstice because his head, Resh, the sun, his head is below the center. You know, so maybe it's the winter solstice that his torch is pointing downward, you know. So there's lots of ways you can kind of think about this. The letter associated with the hanged man is Mem. It's the last letter in your first name. his legs are crossed in the manner of Cautis and Cautopates, who were the solstitial sort of Saint John, if you will, of the Mithraic Tauroctony, which was a bas-relief, whatever. So you can go nuts thinking about this stuff, that's for sure. And you can go nuts with all the different correspondences that flood your mind when you think about these images. Mem has a gematria value of 40. So I'm going to write out the letter Mem. In Hebrew, Mem is elemental water. So there's no planetary or zodiacal correspondence because it's one of the three mother letters. So I'm going to write the glyph for water, which is an upside down triangle without a line through it. I'm going to write down 40. And I'm going to write down that it means water. So here's what we got for Tim. We just took your name, T-I-M. We transliterated it into Hebrew. Now here's another thing. You're not bound by these rules where you have to look up what you can, but you're not bound by the rules where you have to look up what actually is Tim in Hebrew, you know, and then use those letters. Maybe it's something totally different. That doesn't really matter. What you have to do is do the work. What you have to do is take the name. You can transliterate it. It was fine for Eliphas Levi. His name was a transliteration of his given Christian name in French, right? So you could transliterate the name. You could put it into Hebrew. You could find out its gematric value. Like for yours, it's 450. Your name is 450, right? So there's many ways you can go from there. You could apply theosophical addition. Oh, mem final. Is that what you're doing, Paul? You could do mem final, that as well. So there is a final configuration of it. I'm going to stick with a lower number at this point because I think 4 and 5 and 0 equal 9. So you could take 9 and let's do this. Let's be nice to you and say 9. It sort of reduces to Teth, which is the serpent. So a reduction card for you. What's your zodiacal? What's your sun sign? You don't know your sun sign.
I just looked it up in Vedic, and I was cross-pollinating in my head. Virgo.
Virgo. Well, that's funny. So we're back to the very center of your name, Virgo, Tim. Virgo is ruled by Mercury, hence your attraction to Hermeticism. You know, I think I know you to be interested in that stuff from things you post and how I've stalked your Facebook. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. 459, that reduces to 9. Or if we go with 1010 using the mem final, we could reduce it to 2. Let's do both and say the house of the serpent, because 2, right? 2 is bet, or house, right? And it's the magician. So here we'll do something fun, and then this will be the last bit of practicum here, of just having fun with Hermetic Qabalah and try and find the deeper meaning of Tim Dahlman. You know, what is Tim Dahlman's true self? So we're gonna find we need the magician and we need strength. And we're doing that just in an effort to sort of, there was what we already started with, which was the 3 letters of your name. I'm just flipping through all the cards here. Oh, they're going to be the last 2 cards. It's classic Jaime. Let's see. There's one of them. Come on, dude. I missed it. All right, forget about it. We're just doing Teth. So there's that 9. T or Tav, right? Yod or I. Mem, just the regular form, which equals 40. That totals to 450. 4 and 5 equals 9, right? 9 is the number of the Hebrew letter corresponding to this card, which is strength. right? Because the letter Teth corresponds to this. So you could look at these cards and you could meditate on them because they mean your name. They have, Kabbalistically, they resonate with your name through various correspondences. And correspondences are what makes it hermetic. It's a central tenet of Hermeticism that these things correspond. It's like Ficino's chains. It's like the Sunthamata. You know, it's the way that we have a connection on the terrestrial sphere to the celestial sphere through cosmic sympathies, Neoplatonic cosmic sympathies, as talked about by Posidonius, right? You see this all over the tradition, and you definitely see it in Hermetic Kabbalah. It's one of the Fraserian sort of central tenets of magic itself, sympathetic magic, correspondence, you know. So what I would do if I were you is whatever tarot card you're interested in or whatever deck you have at home, pull out your strength card and use it for meditation, because know that it contains the essence of your name in some occult way, that means more to you than it does to me or anybody else, because it's your name, you know. So I would encourage everybody who in your process of meaning making and in your whatever occult studies you may or may not be interested in, to definitely dig deep into this hermeneutic interpretive method that you can apply to just about anything. And it's just a blast. We didn't even get it. You know, I'm really, really into astrology. We didn't even get into any of that right here. We could have gone off astrologically. We could have taken your natal chart or even a transit chart and crunched that into, you know, its component parts in glyphs. We could have made a name out of it. We could have made a magic word for you. We could have made a particular sigil that represents the essence of who you are, sort of astrologically or Kabbalistically. So many different cool things you could do that add to your ritualism, that add to your meaning and your apprehension of everyday life, that I think is crucial. You know, I get excited about it because this stuff really helps me to kind of digest information in the world. It's mythiopoeic. You know, it's the very process of being fulfilled. It enriches life, it provides meaning, and it gives you a sense of engagement with the world on several hermetic planes, several levels, because again, we're working with this hermetic sort of fractal system, right? And we're drawing down celestial powers, and we're, you know, up and down through the spheres, like Inanna in her descent into the underworld, or like, or Odysseus's ascent through the cave of the nymphs when he passes from the gate of Cancer to the gate of Capricorn. Who rules Cancer? The moon. Who rules Capricorn? Saturn. Didn't we just learn that the moon is Yesod and Saturn is Binah? And when you ascend through these spheres, that's what Porphyry talked about. So it's massive, massive information, and it spans the entirety of this beautiful Western esoteric tradition that we have to utilize to make our lives more meaningful. And to me, that's massive. So yeah, I bored you with some history stuff at the beginning of this thing. And yes, this is a tremendously convoluted system that takes a long time to learn. But you know, I just want you to know that I find great value in it, and there are ways you can learn it. And with that, I got just a couple more. This is an easy slide. Ready? So here. Why would I want to study this? Do you want me to read this down?
This would be like the know thyself thing. And so like if you're looking at correspondences related to your name, that could be like as above, so below type thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the, again, it's
make it personal.
For sure. It's the esoteric substratum of your, well, in this case, your name, you know, and your name is, you know, that's part of the, you've lived into your name. You know, I mean, everybody has to some extent lived into your name. You know, it's an abstraction. It's some platonic shadow existing someplace else before you live into it, you
So,
know, until you become who you are.
so,
Uh,
so I could like use myself or decipher like an archetype based on that name, maybe using um, some of these techniques, and possibly even write like a short narrative where I could make like personal goals for myself, or like
and
and
a sigil.
put it in there where it would make more meaning to me.
Yeah, you can do full on magic with it. That's what I'm talking about. Is these are the nuts and bolts for magical operations. You know, this is it's the fruition of this system is when you start to apply these theoretical ideas that we've been throwing around. Here, I know it's getting late. I'm gonna share my screen again. And Tim, you've been a great subject. It's been a pleasure to crunch up your name there and put it into our system. So let me just get up to, I could have gone the other way. All right, so why would I want to study this? Because this perspective, it aids in the process of meaning making. It enriches and deepens our experience of life's phenomena and events. It aids in the interpretation of cinema, art, literature, and all art expression. You ever watch the films of, say, Ingmar Bergman? Or did you ever watch Jodorowsky? Alejandro Jodorowsky, if you've seen any of his films, you almost can't get through one of his films without knowing the nuts and bolts of Qabalah and alchemy. You know, it's like if you don't know that, you are entirely lost. You're missing the point. You know, but look when you apply it to myth. You know, um, you should immediately, when you're thinking about Aphrodite and Ares and their love making outside of the gaze of Hephaestus, right, her husband. You know, sometimes I'll think of, well, how is Netzach related to Geburah? You know, how is Venus related to Mars? You could think about that astrologically. You could think about how they're interceded by Tifereth, the sun, and is that heat somehow the furnace of Hephaestus, the cunning worker in all metals? You know, I don't know. So see what I'm saying is you could really use it to find meaning. You could use it towards the development of a personal mythology. And this is what I'm talking about, like with Tim, you know, going through his name, seeing that the hangman is up in the mix, that the hermit, you know, corresponds in a very meaningful way in the center of his name, that his name reduces to Teth, wisdom, the strength card, you know, and what does that mean in his personal life, you know? Finally, active participation in an unfolding narrative in which you are the hero. When we surround ourselves with meaning, when we surround ourselves with let's say a Hermetic Kabbalistic narrative, right, that we're living through, you know, and we're keeping an eye on our transits and our astrology, and we're trying to, not in some crazy, you know, tinfoil hat, I need a straitjacket kind of way, but I mean like in a way that really enhances and deepens life's experiences. How do I learn to apply this? Now, I get asked this sometimes, and to my knowledge, there are exactly 3 ways. Again, you simultaneously read everything you can on Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, mythology, and occult philosophy until it all clicks into a system. Or you join an order, some initiatic tradition that, you know, I would say you're pretty good if you do a reputable GD order, because they hold a pretty good curriculum. Again, reputable, so look into it. But if you join a good GD order, you're going to have to learn this curriculum, because you don't progress through the grades until you meet proficiency in knowledge lectures. So that's a good way to do it, because you have to do it, or else you don't stay in the order. You know, Builders of the Atom is another one, and they do correspondence. I kind of don't recommend that. You should do a live one that has the initiatory aspect intact. Or lastly, number 3, you could buy both of my books. So there is Myth, Magic, and Masonry that came out in 2018 on the Laudable Pursuit imprint. And on the right there is my one that's coming out this Wednesday in 2 days on St. John the feast of St. John the Baptist Day, which is also a Wednesday. Wednesday is very meaningful hermetically because it's the day of Wednos, Odin, who is Mercury, who is Hermes, who is Nebu. You know, so it is it's the most hermetic day of the week, let's say, weekday wise. So these are the ways that you can do that. Myth, Magic, and Masonry can be bought right now on Amazon. Approaching the Middle Chamber doesn't drop until a couple days from now, where it'll be first on the publisher's website for about a week before it drops on Amazon. But we wanted to give him a crack at it because we want to cut Jeff Bezos out of the scene for a little bit and be fair to the publisher. So I encourage you, go to the publisher first, because you think Amazon needs any more money, don't even make me go there. So the end, and you see what I did there? I took the Hebrew word for the end and I gave you its gematria value. So unless did I, let's see, I did hey 6, I did yeah, there it is. So how would you say that? Hisuf. Anybody actually know Hebrew as the end? Hisuf? I'm guessing. Nobody's going to chime in. Hisuf. I think
isn't it just the Sof, like Ein Sof?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. The Sof. Hasuf. Yeah, like Habahir or or like Hayetzera or whatever. The. Okay.
Right. The
Hasuf.
Hey is the and the Sof, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. The end. So that's all I got. We could do, Joe, we got time for a quick Q&A.
Yep, let me put it back in gallery view. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to plug something real quick before we get into Q&A. I do have a couple of questions here from folks in the chat. Let me bring up my thingamajiggy. Stand by. Start. So everybody, real quick, I just wanted to plug something before we get into a very long conversation with Jaime. Righty. Can everybody see my screen? Awesome. Cool. So for those that have not heard before, we are still having the Mid-Atlantic Esotericon. It's been moved to July 25th instead of the middle of June when we've had it in the past, and it is moving to an all virtual event. So those who cannot attend physically, because we're not having a physical thing, can all attend virtually. So just to go over some of the speakers, move my camera. We've got Chuck Dunning, we've got Brother Don McAndrews, we've got Brother Joe Wages, Brother Dave Bacon. We also have Brother Angel Millar and Brother Robert Johnson. So those are going to be 6 presentations that we're going to be doing. We're going to have some extra stuff as well. So for those of you that have not purchased tickets yet and are purchasing tickets, we've drastically reduced the price of the tickets. And everything that we don't spend to put on the event, you know, to host it online and host videos for people that buy tickets and things like that. Everything else we're donating to Virginia Rainbow's charity this year. For those of you who do not know what it is, I'm going to explain. So Give Kids the World Village is a place in Orlando, Florida, and it is a really large multi-acre resort that's in Central Florida, and kids that are terminally ill and kids with critical illnesses and their families go there for a week-long, all expenses paid vacation with their loved one. And it is an amazing charity, and we've been here in Virginia, we've been trying to help raise money for it because it is absolutely phenomenal. So tickets are $15 for those that have not purchased tickets already. And again, you've got 6 speakers. Jaime, I'm going to spoil it and say, let everybody know we're going to have some tarot readings as well. So if you would like your tarot read by someone whose name rhymes with Jamie Lamb that day, we'll have signups for that pretty soon. And yeah, so if you want more information, I'll put it on Refracted Light, but we also have our own Facebook page at Mid-Atlantic Esotericon. And again, I just wanted to plug that because we're doing really awesome stuff for a amazing charity. So I wanted to make sure you are all aware of that. And with that, I will stop sharing. And I'm gonna, Jamie, I'm gonna touch on the questions that that came up in the chat first before I let people go. Daniel asked way back when you were going over the slide with the all the different breakdown between the Hebrew letters and their constellation and planets and stuff, the ones with the chart. He was asking what was the stuff all the way to the left of the grid. I think it was the cipher, but I didn't want to answer for him.
Okay, so here, I'm going to share a screen real quick because I got something queued up. It's that thing that I was looking for earlier. Let me see. All right, this is from the new book. This is you see it says proof there. This is one of the appendices, and in the appendices of the new book, it's a fatty. It's 452 pages total, but in the appendices, I put some of the Tarotic astrological and other correspondences here. So you can, these are essentially, essentially from the Golden Dawn cipher manuscript. So I put their path on the tree. If you get this and you get, I put Kircher's tree in here from Oedipus Egyptiacus. And I put Agrippa's planetary hours, all the things that are going to aid in the construction of, say, ritualism. I put something in there about sigil construction. And so to answer his question, what was in there was just more correspondences, probably the tarot correspondences. I'd have to go back to the image, and I don't know.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what it was. It was the one that was hand drawn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a Trithemian cipher, so you'd literally have to sit there and. In fact, I can get the book that's in right now and tell you exactly what it said, but I'd have to unplug my headset and everything.
No, that's cool. That's cool. We can
I'll tell them you can get my book and or get the complete Golden Dawn cipher manuscripts. Darcy Kuntz, he put out an excellent translation of the cipher manuscripts.
Awesome. And then the other question I saw in the chat was, somebody on Facebook wanted to know again the name of the book. I don't know if you want to put the cover back up so people can be sure.
Oh, am I sharing? I'm sharing still. Yeah. Here, let me do that.
And then while you're doing that, somebody asked, Clinton Green asked, can you ask him what he thinks about chicken Qabalah?
Now I'm going to be honest. I like Lon Duquette's work. I believe it's solid work. I liked his Key to Solomon's Key. I haven't gotten all the way through Chicken Qabalah, and I'll tell you why. And forgive me if he's here or anything. I'm sorry. It's the cutesy tone. You know what I mean? Like, I have a hard time, and this is personal. Maybe you're into that sort of thing where it's like, I prefer a heavier, more serious tone. I read a lot of 19th, early 20th century occultism, and earlier than that. I mean, I just like a serious tone about it, despite how, you see me interacting here and I joke around and stuff, but I just prefer a more serious tone, and I don't get that out of Lon Duquette's work. I think his work is very valuable. So I'm not I'm strictly giving you a personal opinion as to tone. So it's hard for me to digest. The body has to mean something. You know what I mean? Like, the presentation is something to me. So rest assured, for all my joking and stuff, here, I'm going to give you a taste. Here, let's go to just any old place. Here, here's my tone. Thereby we produce the number 3 from the pillar of severity, application of the proofs. You know, so I'm not like, hey, what would Barney the purple dinosaur say about meaning making? Or, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to joke around or make puns or any kind of stuff like that. It's serious business to me. And in fact, here, I'm going to show you one other thing from the proof. Kind of, here's what I like. Where was, oh, it's down at the very end, I think. Oh my God. No, I know where it is. Hold on, sorry. Check this out. All right, so everybody's favorite guy, Pierce Vaughn, wrote a thing here. He did the foreword to my book, and he wrote, in an age of sound bites and tweets, we are reminded of the great Masonic books of Waite, Pike, Wilmshurst, and Ledbetter, where a close study was rewarded with many insights and points for meditation. Indeed, one might call this book a college course in the fellowcraft degree, because I deal with the 7 liberal arts and sciences. So that was, I told, when I got this back from Pierce, I was like, okay, that's going on the back of the book for sure. Thanks so much for that. Anyway, so comes out Wednesday.
Jamie?
Yeah.
Uh,
Clinton.
yes, I was just curious on your thoughts with Chicken Qabalah, because I recommend it to people that have never that heard of Qabalah a week ago and they want to jump into it. And I feel like that's a good buffer zone. Of course, after that, I direct them to like Waite's Holy Qabalah, and then dig them in a little bit further on the Jewish side of Qabalah, and then they can dig into the Gematria and the Kabbalistic Qabalah if they're. But most people honestly don't make it that far, if I'm being honest.
So before Jamie answers that, sorry, man. I gotta cut the Facebook feed off because it's getting long on there. I'll keep the Zoom going so we can all yell at Jamie. But Facebook people, I'm sorry. I gotta let you guys go. Love you all. Buy Jamie's book, and you will be a better person for it. And thank you so much for coming. And so I'm gonna stop the live feed and see y'all momentarily.
Clinton, so that, well, I was just sort of transfixed with that skull that you have back there. Is that a real human skull? You're on mute.
This one or the one with sunglasses?
The one with the Mercury symbol on its forehead.
Oh, you can see that from there?
Yeah. Is that real?
No, unfortunately. Well, or fortunately.
Mercury, Saturn, and Jupiter. Mars. Okay. Yep. You got them all. Oh, wow. That's a cool skull. So,
this was a gift from a friend who's in another initiatic order with me, and
wow.
It takes center stage every Friday night for different things. It's a meditative device is what I use.
That is super cool. Anyway, so yeah, I think Lon Duquette's work is a great icebreaker to get into Qabalah. Dion Fortune is a lot of people's sort of jump off. That's mine. You know, that was the first serious book on Qabalah I highlighted the heck out of, and I wrote so much marginalia in that book. It's almost like I put my own book inside of it. I mean, there was just a lot of ideas and a lot of great concepts. And she, of course, comes through. I think she was Alpha at Omega, but she comes from essentially a GD tradition, and if not GD proper, and that's a really good one that I recommend highly. Paul Foster Case, excellent work on Qabalah. Yeah. So I'd cleave as close to the GD tree or tradition, to those roots as possible. But that's just me and my inclination. You can go as far back or in any tradition that suits your interest and your proclivity.
For those that are really into it and don't mind the name Aleister Crowley, I do keep a copy of 777 and other Kabbalistic writings with me, not at all times, but on my shelf behind me. And I have lent that to some people, but I've found that a lot of people find that a little too deep in the waters for them.
Well, you know what? You know where he kind of got that Kabbalistic essay that he did there was, it seems to be patterned on Samuel Little McGregor Mather's introduction to the Zohar, the Qabalah Denudata, which was Rosenroth's Latin translation of the selected book of the Zohar. And he did a translation on that, and Mathers did a brilliant introduction where he goes through all the theoretical kind of nuts and bolts, how to apply it and everything.
I'm going to let other people ask questions now. Thank you, Jaime.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Tim is still in a state of euphoria from having his name drawn, so we'll skip him. I see data guy John Ruark showed up.
Data guy.
He heard the word data and he popped on. Very cool. Well, shit, I'm not going to keep you guys if nobody else has any other questions. Jaime, this was absolutely phenomenal. I'm sorry if I spoiled the surprise, but Jaime will be doing tarot readings. We still got to work out how everybody's going to sign up for that. So we'll do that in the next week or two. But Jaime will be one of our guest tarot readers, so you can sign up for a tarot reading during Esotericon. And I'll let the other person announce that as well. But there'll be two folks. So they'll be limited. We're not going to be able to do 300 tarot readings. So it's going to be a first come, first serve kind of thing. But we'll make sure that you guys get all the info. And again, thank you so much to everyone who came to spend some time with us. Jaime, thank you again for helping us out. Again, this was user requested, so we're going to try and get some more of these out in the coming weeks. And for those that were talking on no, Chuck is not doing tarot readings. Do you know how long that would take if Chuck did a tarot reading? A 10-minute reading would take 60 minutes because, he speaks so calmly and lovely about everything. So no, we're not doing that.
About 45 minutes, if I remember correctly.
No, that's too long, man. Like Jaime said, we're in a soundbite culture, so he's just going to give you the nuts and bolts. But again, thank you for coming, everybody, and we'll send out more details on future stuff. And I'm going to turn off recording. If you guys want to stay and shoot the shit, that's totally cool. But I'm going to stop the recording so we can get this on YouTube. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for setting this up, Joe, as always.